Welcome to our afternoon session. My name is Bob Churchill. I work with the International Humanist Academic Union. It's very nice to see you all here. We're going to have a 2-hour session now, a debate and a discussion with you all on, I guess, mainly on the work of Aubrey de Grey and what that might entail. Let me introduce the two main speakers. Aubrey de Grey is an English author and theoretician in the field of gerontology and the Chief Science Officer of Sense Research Foundation. His research focuses on whether regenerative medicine can thwart the aging process and works on the development of what he calls strategies for engineered negligible senescence. I'm sure we'll work out more what that means shortly. Peter Brandt works at the Bioethics Institute Ghent. His research project investigates intrinsic arguments for and against self-enhancements, as well as parental enhancements of children in the pre-birth stages of life. So I think to start with, what we're going to do, by the way, I think is we'll have sort of an opening kind of 55 minutes or so, but we'll see how it goes, of discussion and back and forth between our speakers. We'll have a short 5-minute break just because it's so hot and dry, so that people can make sure they've got a drink of water and so on. And then we'll have the remainder of the session. There's a big open forum, question and answer with everyone, but we'll see how it goes. Okay, so to start with, if we have something akin to sort of opening statements from both of you on really on the broad question of the desirability to start with, before we get into any practical details about the how, on the desirability of the possibility of extending life even as far as indefinitely. So, Aubrey, perhaps you'd like to speak first on that.
Thanks, yes, absolutely. And thank you all for coming. I'm delighted to be here. I apologise, first of all, for the fact that I only arrived an hour ago and I'm going to have to leave not long after the session. I wish I could have come for longer, but one of the terrible downsides of being in demand is that you end up not being able to stay at the whole of the conference anymore, which is really grim. But I'm very glad that we have 2 whole hours now, so that I'm going to be able to expound as much as possible and obviously exchange views with Peter and with all of you with regard to all of the issues around all this. So, just in order to give a statement that's just for a few minutes, I guess, giving a summary of where I stand and why I'm working on this, why I have chosen to dedicate my life to this cause. I think really what I want to get across to you all is that my motivations are really, really boring. I'm actually not what your typical transhumanist would be. I'm not someone who thinks in terms of the desirability of enhancement, uploading, moving our consciousness into a different substrate, or giving us the ability to travel to neighbouring galaxies or anything like that. I'm not saying I'm against any of those things, not at all, but that's not what gets me up in the morning. What I'm about is really exactly the same as what most people are about in terms of the motivations. The only real difference between my motivations and other people's is in terms of what I think is feasible enough to be worth working for. So in particular, I'm working now on better medicine. 20 years ago, I wasn't a biologist at all. I was a computer scientist. And again, then, I worked on better computers. In that case, my motivation was humanitarian. I was interested in producing artificial intelligence. But here, again, I want to contrast what I was doing back then with what is often discussed as artificial intelligence in the transhumanist community. Today, when you hear about artificial intelligence from many experts, such as, for example, Ray Kurzweil, I'm sure most of you know that name, they will be talking about something that they like to call artificial general intelligence, which basically means computers that can do everything, absolutely everything that we can do, better than we can. Now, of course, the definition of better is very difficult to actually come up with, and I don't want to digress into that. It's a big area. But I wasn't working on that at all. I was working on simply the possibility of computers having enough common sense to be able to do all the things that we have to do, but we don't enjoy doing. You know, like going down mines or serving hamburgers for each other, things like that. I was interested in simply improving the quality of life of mankind. And then, nearly 20 years ago now, I began to realise, mainly thanks to discussions with my wife over there, whom I met 23 years ago, that there was a much more important humanitarian problem, which was to stop people from getting sick when they get old. And that extraordinarily few biologists were actually working on this problem. So I switched fields, but I didn't switch my motivation. My motivation was exactly the same. I wanted to work on the world's most serious humanitarian problem. And I realized that the one that I could make the most difference to was not artificial intelligence, the way I had thought. It was actually aging. Because aging causes even more suffering, causes even more limits on our quality of life, and I'll come to our quantity of life in a moment. It causes even more damage to that than the requirement to do menial things, like going down mines and so on. And I had just gone through life until the age of 30 or so, presuming that biologists agreed with me on this, and that they were all doing this. They were all going about trying their best to develop medicines that would stop people from getting sick when they get older, right? But then when I discovered that that wasn't true, that they were not doing that, I decided, well, okay, I'd better do it myself. So that's how I became a gerontologist, and that's why I have created a movement to really make this happen sooner than it otherwise might. Now, there is one very important thing that you will probably have noticed in what I have said so far. I have not said anything really about longevity, and that's not an accident. Most people think that I work on longevity, but I don't. And furthermore, it's a little irritating to me that most people think I work on longevity, because I've been saying for at least 10 years that I don't. And I've been saying it in every single interview I do, and I do about 100 interviews a year. But still, people think I do. And the reason they think I do, the reason this is such a hard misconception to dispel, seems to be that I do accept that if my goals for health of people who are old, who were born a long time ago, if those goals can be achieved, then there will be a big side effect in terms of longevity. I'm sure all of you appreciate that there is a correlation between how old you are and how likely you are to die in the next year. People of the age of the people in this room are very unlikely to die in the next year, you know, barring some stupid thing like not looking when you cross the street. It's, you know, the statistics are less than 1 in 1,000 people of your age will die in the next year. But if you're 70 years old, it's much higher. It's something like 1 in 50. And if you're 80 years old, it's up around 1 in 20, and so on. It's no fun having been born a long time ago. Now, of course, the reason this comes about is because people who were born a long time ago tend to be sick. They tend to be not very well. Sometimes they have diseases, specific diseases like Alzheimer's or atherosclerosis or cancer or diabetes, and sometimes they don't. But that's not really the point, because the reason we think of some people as having diseases and some people not is just because of the way that we choose to use words to describe ill health. There are some types of ill health that we give names to, and there are some types that we don't give names to. So we end up in a situation where we think there's this disease and that disease and the other disease, and then there's aging itself. As if aging itself were some kind of alternative to these diseases. But that's completely wrong. And that's where I'm going to end. The last point I want to make before I stop is to make sure you understand that the diseases of old age, the diseases that hardly anybody of your age gets, but people twice your age or 3 times your age get them a lot more, Those diseases are part of aging. They are not alternatives to aging at all. The only reason that any disease can be a disease of old age is by being some aspect of the later stages of aging, some aspect of a process that goes on throughout life and which is initially harmless, some side effect of being alive in the first place, which eventually causes you to get sick. So, in conclusion, what I do is medical research. Nothing more, nothing less. I'm just another medical researcher. I'm interested in stopping people from getting sick. And the only reason that I'm standing here today, the only reason that I I'm such a lightning rod for controversy, is because the particular type of medical research that I do and that I promote seems to be reasonably likely to deliver a very much bigger side effect in terms of longevity than any other medical research that we have seen so far. That's all I do. Thank you.
All right. Well, I'll just begin to things obvious said to make it more interesting. Well, so I know that I had 4 things. Maybe just a word of where I'm coming from. So I study enhancement in general. For those of you who are not fully up to speed with that particular niche subject, enhancement medicine in general is an umbrella concept to refer to all kinds of ways in which we can enhance our existence, our bodily existence, our own nature, so to live a life that is more suited to our desires. It can include being I don't want to use longevity now, but so staying younger longer. But it can also refer to many other things. It's about doping. It's about aesthetic surgery. It's about selecting desired traits in embryos. All these things. Now, Aubrey said that his motivation is not so much enhancement, and certainly not the pie in the sky transhumanist types of enhancement. You have these transhumanists who think all this stuff, all this humanist stuff, is so 20th century, and they really talk about the wackiest things. Uploading your mind onto computers and all these things. Now, I don't want to talk about those transhumanists, and I want to get into this debate about extending youth, and as a consequence of it, extending our lifespan. Well, just to mention that that's not necessarily the case. For instance, they have done some experiments, certainly Aubrey knows more about it, in which they have, for instance, managed, correct me if I'm wrong, today, this is an experiment that was done successfully, to radically extend the youthfulness of certain types of mice, I think, but which then die much faster, no?
Only a little bit. In general, if you greatly extend the youth of any laboratory organism, including mice, then you will also extend its life. So the amount of time at the end, which is not healthy, is not altered very much. It is just delayed.
Anyway, but so there's there's many ways in which these projects can go about. I guess Aubrey will also get into the details of his strategies for engineering negligible senescence. Now, the strange thing is though, where Aubrey said that it's not really enhancement that makes him get up in the morning. He's fine with it. As you mentioned, it's mostly extending life, extending youth, and as a side consequence, extending life. For me, in a sense, I've never really understood why this has been such a point of interest. This debate on extending youth and, as a consequence, extending life. I don't see why for some people that's the grail of the improvement of life. I think it's not necessarily something that merits to be the pinnacle of the enhancement project. I think you could just as well talk about the manipulation of emotion, of appearance, of our physical capacities via doping and so forth. You can make all these arguments that maybe these are the priority in the enhancement debate. That's just one thing. Now, interestingly, you also talked about your desire to unburden humanity, right? So that was your interest when you started with artificial intelligence, and it's still your interest in what you do now. Now, this is what really gets to the core of my argument. I think, in fact, why a lot of people profoundly dislike, and many humanists also profoundly dislike all this talk about enhancement, of meddling with nature, of changing human nature. It's a criticism that's widely present also in humanist circles. I think actually one of the reasons why there is this deep disgruntlement and sometimes even a despair and anger and hatred against not only doping and aesthetic surgery, but also against your project. A lot of people react very viciously against it. I think it's exactly for this reason. They fear, and I can understand that fear. Actually, I would also argue for that fear being correct. That if we do in fact manage to deeply unburden our existence from what you have called menial activities, from going down the mines. If you imagine such a project to take shape and to progress significantly, I think the fear of many people is that we would end up in a way of life that is fundamentally frivolous, in which there is no work to be done, in which all kinds of need and the need for work and also the need to engage in useful activities, they've all come to naught, because once we've managed to take care of sickness in a sufficient way, if we no longer have to go down the mines, what will life be like? Well, life will be, if we're not going down the mines, you can say life will just be days and days and days, and if your project also cashes out, it'll just be centuries and centuries of not going down the mines, but playing minesweeper, or climbing down the mines just for the fun of it. So life will fundamentally lose its point if we truly manage to completely overcome all kinds of obstacles to existence. And there's this quote of Bill McKibben, who is a profound humanist, a profound environmentalist also, and he's written the book Enough. It's a pamphlet. It cuts a lot of corners, but there he says, if we ever manage to overcome death, or if we manage to radically change human nature, well, we'll have nothing really left to do in our lives. Our lives will become play. We just wake up every day and there's no work, the machines are doing it. There's no death that gives some kind of tension to our days where we have to do things now. No, because that will just be expanded indefinitely in the future. So it would just become this hugely absurd and hollow existence. And Bill McKibben makes the argument very briefly, in which he says, having nothing to do is one kind of hell. It's just disaster. Imagine if we really have no more work to do, and if we don't have forms of risk and ultimately of death, of finitude in our lives, we'll just become, as we said earlier in the talk here, a big blob of freedom, with so much time on our hands, and with nothing really to do. We'll just be bored to death. So we may not die, but in a sense you could say it will just only aggravate, to use a phrase of Kierkegaard, life as being sickness unto death. And you could well imagine that a lot of people would, at some point, want to put an end to it, to a life that is, in which we have lost all, perhaps there are illusions, but they are practical illusions, in which we have lost all sense of being created to some purpose, having some kind of given nature, a given lifespan that's good, that's meaningful. if all that goes down the drain.
About the jobs, well, you said that we will lose the meaning of life and everything if we don't work. But that can be true if your work has a meaning and you love it. But for people who have to go down the mines or, I don't know, clean the garbage, yeah, usually people who say things like that we would lose the meaning of life, they don't have to do these jobs. It's okay if you write a book and you do something nice, but yeah, for some people, not doing their jobs would be very good and would provide a new and better meaning in their lives.
I don't know. I'm not sure, because a typical example is the farmer, right? Because you see this, being played out still across the world, where you have automatization of agriculture, and suddenly a revolution sweeps over the land, and a lot of farmers who had a very tough life, who had to just constantly work the fields, suddenly they've become meaningless, because it can be done way better by automated processes and so forth. So you have many cases in which, for instance, those laid off farmers who become factually unemployed, would politically be granted the means of sustenance. They would be given a pre-pension or something. But it fundamentally, that's the archetype of a frustrated man. Imagine the farmer sitting there, waking up day after day, free, to spend his days as he likes, playing cards, and he hates it because a lot of people fundamentally want to have, they have a need for need. They want to wake up and think, oh, for instance, humanists, imagine a world where there's no third world crisis. It's just all solved. There's no fight to fight. Yeah, but at the same time, of course, it would be very nice. But imagine, though, a life where there's just no fight to fight. There's no work to do. You can't take pride in activism. You can't take pride in meaningful work.
But if we let that fear put us off, wouldn't we all still be hunter-gatherers, resisting any idea of...
Well, that's where I'm tragic in my thinking. We cannot put it off, because at the same time, I think that's ultimately who we are. We are the frivolous, meaningless animal. The human condition is fundamentally one of play, eroticism, and absurdity, and artistry.
But also, this is something we were taught, like the farmers, they feel bad, as you said, because they were taught that they have to do this their whole life. It was suddenly taken from them, and they felt that society was kind of criticizing them because they were using money without providing something. But if things change with better technology, then that mentality will also change eventually. So people will find meaning in other things, like there's a whole world out there. You can live 2,000 years and still not see everything, not experience everything. There are lots of books to read, places to see, the space is available, kind of becoming so.
Yeah. Well, the people who like, I think there will be a shift. I think the relatively small percentage of people who can really live that kind of life, of just play and eroticism and artistry, they'll do that, and then there'll just be a huge mass of fundamentally frustrated, depressed, self-deceiving people. Suicide.
I think there's really two key points here. The first one, which I think has come out implicitly in what both of you have said, but I think really needs to be brought out explicitly, is the distinction between the change from one lifestyle to another and the process of change from one lifestyle to another. The particular circumstances that you are both highlighting, that you're highlighting in particular, are circumstances in which the change is sudden, and especially when it is effectively unanticipated, and society has not built up the structures with which to give the people who are experiencing that change the tools to employ it properly. Now, we are used to this in society, and again here I think I would like to talk about the collective rather than the individual for a moment. Let's just talk about the Industrial Revolution. It was pretty turbulent. A lot of people didn't like it. But in the end, not very many people don't like it. We're pretty happy that it happened. So we can look back and we can say, well, in theory, how could we have done it better? How could it have been less turbulent? How could we have got from where we were to where we are with less suffering, less of the sort of things that you have been talking about. And of course, a lot of that is wishful thinking because it takes resources to do that. You have to know it's coming and so on. But even if we can't do it, so the hell what? Ultimately, we end up in a situation that's better than we were before. Now, the other thing that I think is very important to tease out of this is the reason why people have the need for need, as Peter, I think I like that phrase very much, it's very good. What they really need is fulfillment. They need to feel that what they're doing with their time has meaning in their own turn, whatever the hell meaning is. And what I think meaning is they need to have self-esteem. They need to feel that they can hold their head high in the company of people they know, their family, their friends, their colleagues, and feel that they are spending their days in a productive manner. And of course, I feel the same way, even though I wouldn't have I am one of Peter's small minority. I can assure you, I would have no trouble at all having nothing to do. Because I have at least 1,000 years of backlog of things I haven't yet done. Right. So, yeah, I mean, I can totally get that. But that's really what it's all about. I think it's all about it's about the interpersonal consequences of how you spend your time. And this is why careers, jobs in which the beneficiary of your work is someone with whom you directly interact tend to be more fulfilling than ones in which you never see that beneficiary because they buy a car from someone eight people down the road from the person who built it, for example. So I think this kind of tells us that as we develop more and more automation, we want to focus on the things where there is less interaction between the agent and the beneficiary, and we really could think twice about trying to make machines that are better poets than we are, or whatever.
So we as people have some stages. We are born, we go to school, we go to college, high school, we get the job, we get married, and when we get old, we raise our children, and blah blah blah. How would you think, and this question is for both of you, these stages of life would change once we get to live up until 130 years, for example? Because you can't go to school for high school for more than 4 years because there's no need for it.
I'll take this one first, because it makes sense.
You understood what I was, okay.
So, first of all, let's answer it from a biological perspective.
Okay.
These therapies, because they are medicines, they will not alter things that we don't want to alter. So in other words, for example, the way that we grow in our first 20 years will be just the same as now. These therapies will probably not be applied to people until they are 40 or 50 or 60 years old, because they will be repair therapies. They will be repairing damage, which takes a long time to accumulate. The damage that the result of that damage, the diseases that we see in old age, will be gone. So effectively, if you think of 3 stages of life, there's up, there's a long, and there's down. Okay, there will be up the same as now, and there will be a long indefinitely. All right, and no down, because you just won't get there. You will just have more time to be hit by a truck. So then to come to, I think, what the main purpose of your question was, how we will use that time.
How would the change, these stages, how will they
I get it.
change?
So I think that is still something we cannot really say. For example, at the moment, people generally go to school for, and they have education for maybe 15 years on average. Yeah. And it was probably more like 5 years if we go back 1,000 years from now, probably less than that in fact. So changes like that may continue to occur. We just don't know how much more value we will place on extending education. But of course also there are options in terms of having education at periodic times during one's life. There is still very little money spent on adult education and retraining and so on, but we do know that sometimes it's very productive to change careers, just as I did, for example. Yeah. Right? And so it may become fashionable to change careers more, even when you don't need to, so to speak. In fact, it may be society may decide that actually it's better to encourage people to change careers by, for example, raising their tax rate, their income tax, if they stay in the same job. There are plenty of ways for society.
Okay, so you're saying that humanity will find some new stages that will become normal at some point.
Not really. What I'm saying is we can't say the answer. What I'm saying is that there are so many unknowns that on the one hand it's impossible to say how it will be, but on the other hand it's impossible to say that it's definitely going to be bad. There are so many ways, so many knobs that we can turn to optimize how things are, to choices, to let people have more choice in terms of how long they retire, whether they retire and then they go back to work for another 40 years and then they retire for another 10 years and then they go back to work and become a rock star for the next 40 years and so on. You got the idea, right? There's so many choices, it's impossible.
Thank you. And Peter?
I think, just also as a reference, you have, for instance, Leon Kass. He's one of the main guys. He was the chair of the President's Council on Bioethics under the Bush administration. And he really loads, especially this aspect of it. He loves the Lion King idea of the circle of life. And I think that's really what life is all about, this beautiful circle of babies growing and then adults, and then they become seniors, and it's beautiful, the circle, it's all about the circle. So that's one, if that's your ethic of life and of meaningful life, it will just get crushed completely. And a lot of people fundamentally hate it. If you look at, for instance, now in France, the big riot on one father, one mother for every child, there's just this huge hatred against gay couples bringing up children. Well, that'll just be, quantified. These kinds of hysterias, you can expect these to happen because a lot of people really feel fundamentally entrenched and feel that life only has meaning if there are these, 3, maybe 4 generations. But you also mentioned normality. Will we achieve some kind of normality? I think in any case, that's as a value. I think normality is also.
No, I mean like in civilized countries, there are these stages. Not maybe in Africa, maybe they don't have these stages, but we do. I don't believe in normal. I don't think normal is.
Yeah.
But I was saying that these are, I don't know, to be expected most of the time. So I was asking, how would you think they would change in time?
Well, in detail, I think I just haven't thought these things through enough. So there's
because I was trying to think about it and I just can't figure it out for now because it's the first time I'm thinking about it. So
I think we'll just have to get into the science fiction literature to and also series to just show all kinds of strange ways in which new societies could develop some kind of stable dynamic. But it's meaningless for me to get into the details because I'll just be talking on the top of my head.
I think I have so many books at home now I could spend 1,000 years just finishing reading them, let alone, and that might be my 5th stage, 1,000 years of reading. Right.
Thank you.
At the back there in the corner.
Another way, if you want more equality concerning life extension, you really have to be in favor of it and to invest in scientific ways, because otherwise this inequality will happen anyway, but you will have some treatment in Asia or in other countries for rich people, and you will not have this for the poor people. So one of the paradoxes is people saying, it's not good to have life extension because it will be only for rich people. They are the people making it possible to have this inequality. And one last thing is, at the moment, contrary to what many people think, the inequalities concerning life extensions, concerning the life expectancy in the south and in the north are narrowing. So the life expectancy is rising faster in the southern countries than in the northern countries. Like for example, Bangladesh, it raises 12 years the last 25 years. That's because of there are less children dying and so on, but it's important to know that there are no more differences now than 20 years ago, but less differences.
When I asked the question about who would take the pill, it was phrased as if it would give you an extra 100 years. I know this is probably highly unlikely, but let's just, to confuse matters, Let's assume that the technology is such, like you're going to get filled with nanobots or something. They're what's going to fix things, but Aubrey hasn't invented how to take them out. So once they're in, they have to stay in. So let's now assume that that pill isn't going to give you an extra 100 years. It has to give you, say, 1,000 years is how likely it's to last. Would you still take the pill then? Guaranteed
I need to know one thing when it comes to that, because I think the question is incomplete. Yeah, well, I think the question is incomplete as it's being asked.
Okay.
I think there are logistical elements that are important. First of all, what would you do with the problem of overpopulation? At a given point, people would need to stop to be born. I mean, countries and mountains and so on, so this would be a problem.
Yeah.
And the second question would be, and you already mentioned it before, we'd have more time to get hit by trucks, which is true. We'd have more time to have accidents, to lose limbs, to lose important parts of our body. And as far as I understand, the techniques that you're working on do not necessarily address this.
Oh yeah, they're easy. That's trivial.
So how would we do this?
Well, I mean, I'm not saying it's trivial, but it's a lot easier than most of the things about aging. Aging is really, really hard to fix. That's why I work on it, right? No, growing a new limb is relatively straightforward. And certainly giving you a prosthetic one is very straightforward.
And that was still over half the room, I think, that sort of tentatively put their hands, barring the fact that
Well, we don't know. Maybe all of them will bring their hands up to ask questions about your question.
Yes. That was you. Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
we haven't done the population thing. I mean, everyone's going to have that on their mind. So why don't we do it now?
Okay.
All right? All right. Give you asked about population, right? So, people tend not to be very good at intuition about the mathematics here. And so I'm going to be a bit mathematical for a few minutes. I'm going to start with some very obvious things that a remarkable number of people overlook. First one is, even if we completely eliminated all death, whether it was from aging or from being hit by trucks or anything, people will still only get older at 1 year per year. So we're not going to have any 1,000-year-old people for at least another 900 years, whatever happens. That's easy to miss, but it's very, very important to take into account, because a hell of a lot happens in 900 years. In particular, other technology happens. Now, the big reason why that's important is because other technology is an enormous determinant of the carrying capacity of the planet. If we think about why it's a bad thing that we've got 7 billion people on the planet now, ultimately it comes down to carbon footprint and such like. It comes down to things which are amenable, in principle, to amelioration by technology, by the invention of nuclear fusion or better renewable energy or whatever. We could very easily end up in as little as 50 or 100 years in a situation in which we could have 100 billion people on the planet with less environmental impact than we see today. Now that's something that we must not discount, because if we do discount it, then what we are doing is we're saying, we know better, we know that such and such a technology is not going to happen, therefore we know that there's going to be such and such a problem, in this case overpopulation, therefore let's not go there, let's not invent these technologies. And then 50 years from now, our kids are going to be out there having solved these problems that we thought couldn't be solved, and they haven't got the technologies to let them not get sick when they get old, that they could have had if we'd taken the trouble to develop them, and they're not going to be very happy with us. I do not want to be in that position of having to explain myself in my will or whatever to,
or to your great-great-great-grandchildren.
To people for whom I have failed to develop the technology to keep them from getting Alzheimer's disease because I thought they didn't have the smarts to stop the population from getting unmanageable. Of course, the same also applies not just to technology but also to social choices, to fertility rates and to age at which women have their kids on average. The fertility rate in every single society that's ever reached a certain level of emancipation and education and prosperity of women has always plummeted. I think Israel can just about be considered to be an exception, but pretty much, but absolutely everywhere else. We're seeing it today in the most populous countries in the world, in China, in India, in Brazil. They've got literally half the fertility rate, the average number of kids per woman, that they had 20 years ago. It's ridiculous how rapidly these things happen. And as time goes on, more and more countries are undergoing this transition. This is why the United Nations currently predicts that global population will start to fall around 2050. Now, of course, if we were to eliminate all death, or even the 2/3 of all deaths that are caused by aging, then that would be delayed. But it still means that it's not a problem that's just going to be unmanageable. we also need to take into account the average age at which women have children, which is something that always goes up at the same time that the average number of children goes down. One thing we're going to be fixing when we fix aging is menopause. Now you may think to yourself, oh dear, that's terrible, that's going to exacerbate the overpopulation problem because women will carry on having children for more and more time. But what you need to think about is why women are choosing to have their children later as they become more prosperous and have more choices in life. Of course, different women have different reasons, but the overall outcome seems to be that women are delaying until they can't delay anymore because it's then or never, because of menopause. So after menopause is eliminated, because women have new ovaries or whatever and they can carry on having kids perfectly safely however long they live, then you can imagine that your average woman is going to choose, not every woman of course, but we're talking about populations here, so the average is what matters, is going to choose to delay their first kid by another decade and another decade. And that, of course, if you think about the mathematics, that has an enormous impact on the trajectory of global population. So the population question is certainly not one that we ought to ignore, but it is a question that's very easy to overstate.